So when the 91 war ended and this uprising was crushed, we were in the Kurdish region, and the Kurdish political leaders came to our city and to other cities in northern Iraq. And they said, the Iraqi army is coming, they're going to use chemical weapons, so you better pack and leave. And we said, where to leave? And they say, well, you leave on towards the border with Iran or Turkey. If you are closer to Iran, you run as fast as you can, or walk or take your car to Iran. So we didn't have a car. So my father, my mother, and the 3 brothers and sisters, we walked to Iran 6 days and nights in the mountains in very harsh climate. It was April, it was still cold. And in the mountains, when you get higher, it was snowing sometimes. It was cold. We had no shelter, nothing, no food. History has changed since that moment. Right. All these wars of regime change will not work anymore. Yeah. Because Russia is ready to risk everything, including a world war, to stop this crazy policy.
Welcome to another episode of Independent Thought and Freedom, where we have conversations with some of the most interesting people around the world who are shaking up politics, society, economies, and ideas. We've had some amazing guests on this program, including The Saker, Paul Craig Roberts, Sheikh Imran Hussein, E. Michael Jones, Cynthia McKinney, and more. If you'd like to support us to reach our next goal of actually putting together live events where we bring some of my best guests side by side on one stage, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber on Patreon. You'll find the link below. Also, if you are an author or researcher with important ideas to share with the world and want to have a greater impact, I'm offering a free masterclass, 3 steps on how to leverage your intellectual authority to become a media personality. The link for that class is in the description as well. And now, on to this week's show. Welcome to Independent Thought and Freedom. Is it possible that we are seeing the end of endless war? One of the most important aspects of Donald Trump's candidacy was his promise to end the endless wars in the so-called Middle East and elsewhere. His track record, however, has been mixed in this regard, especially during the period when John Bolton was in the State Department. Thankfully, Bolton is gone, at least for now, and some progress is being made again. The withdrawal of US troops from Syria has driven the media, industrial, academia, think tank complex into a frenzy, with both Republicans and Democrats, Western liberals and conservatives, hysterical about the disaster and humanitarian crisis this will bring about. However, there are others, including myself and our guest, who have a very different view and welcome this development. I'm pleased to have back on my podcast Hussein Askary, the Southwest Asia coordinator of the Schiller Institute, editor of the Arabic language website of the LaRouche movement, a section manager at the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, and author of the very important 250-page study, Extending the New Silk Road to West Asia and Africa, a vision of an economic renaissance. Welcome, Hussein.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirk. I'm very happy and proud to be back on your show. It's a great pleasure to talk to you again.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm really glad to have you here. Our last discussion, as I was saying before, it's stuck with me in so many ways, and there's so many rich veins of insight to mine and and to move forward with, because this is not just about intellectual analysis, but really about moving the world and all our countries in a progressive direction from the disaster that we've been experiencing. And I think you have a lot to share.
Thank you. I think you and I are not analysts, we are activists in a sense, because we want things to change and we are working on that hands-on.
Correct. Now, since the last time we spoke, it's when what some people comically referred to as President Bolton was was pushing for war in Iraq and Venezuela, and so we were speaking about that. Things have radically changed, thankfully, with Bolton gone, and now with the U.S. pullout of Syria. That's very important. But since then, this podcast is now being syndicated on the Independence Media Network in the U.S. So we have some new listeners here, and they may not have heard your story. So can you please give us a little bit of background, because you're a refugee, if I'm not mistaken, from during the first Gulf War in 1991. You lived in the Kurdish areas of Iraq, although you are from the south. So just please give us a little background. I think it's very important and interesting.
Okay, yeah, well, my family come from southern Iraq. My father and mother, they come from an area near what is the ancient Ur in Nasiriyah, near the Euphrates River. And then my father moved to Baghdad during his military service. Had 3 of my brothers born, first in Fallujah to the west of Baghdad. Okay. And then myself and my sister were born in Baghdad in 68 and 71. And then my father was moved, actually, not by his own will, but the government moved him to northern Iraq, to the Kurdish region, to work as a teacher. That was a political decision because he belonged to a grouping which was opposed somehow to the Ba'ath Party. So they closed their school or university, and then they dispersed the students in different parts of Iraq. So my father's lot was in Sulaymaniyah in northern Iraq, and I was 5 years old then. So I grew up in the Kurdish region in Sulaymaniyah. I'm bilingual. I speak Kurdish Surani. Also, my other brothers and sisters, they had 1 brother and 1 sister born in Sulaymaniyah. So they are almost Kurdish, in a sense. But then I went back to Baghdad to the university in 86. And there was also a war going on then between Iraq and Iran.
Yes.
So there are many Gulf wars.
Mm-hmm.
And I studied English, translation, English, Arabic, and some French. And then in 91, when the war broke out, it was my last year in university, I went back to my family in northern Iraq. And then after the war was ended, there was an uprising against the Iraqi army and Saddam Hussein.
If I could just interject here, just for some of the listeners who may not be so familiar with all the intricacies, it's very interesting. In the 86 war, the U.S. were supporting Saddam against Iran. And then in the 91 war, they were against him. So it's all this changing alliances. I know that war between Iraq and Iran was produced tremendous casualties, was huge, but a lot of the world really didn't know about. I think it was over 1 million deaths in that war.
Yes, over 1 million deaths, mostly young men who died, and total destruction of Iran's infrastructure. Ironically, because Iraq was supported both by the United States, Britain. I mean, all the Iraqi military industries were built by British companies in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Matrix Churchill is known. They've moved the whole factory from Manchester to Baghdad in 85.
I think that the historic significance of the war too would have been more recognized by the world if the ancient names were used. If this was called the Persian Mesopotamian War, which is what it was. I mean, sorry, go on.
Well, we were fighting on behalf of other powers.
Correct.
And, so when the 91 war ended and this uprising was crushed, we were in the Kurdish region, and the Kurdish political leaders came to our city and to other cities in northern Iraq. And they said, the Iraqi army is coming, they're going to use chemical weapons, so you better pack and leave. And we said, well, where to leave? And they say, well, you leave on towards the border with Iran or Turkey. If you are closer to Iran, you run as fast as you can, or walk, or take your car to Iran. So we didn't have a car. So my father, my mother, and the 3 brothers and sisters, we walked to Iran 6 days and nights in the mountains in very harsh climate. It was April, it was still cold. And in the mountains, when you get higher, it was snowing sometimes. It was cold. We had no shelter, nothing, no food. So but we managed because we were healthy. And the youngest one of us was like 13 years old.
Right.
And I was 23 years. And my father and mother were in their 50s. So we managed to actually walk quickly, fast pace, until we reached Iran, and then we ended up in refugee camps.
That was like 6 days or something, wasn't it?
Sorry?
You were walking like 6 days, correct?
Yeah,
no
6
food.
days. Yeah.
Mhm.
Our goal is to reach the border as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But many people didn't make it. Children, small children, old people, sick people, they just fell on the side of the street and died. So that was real tragedy.
Wow.
It's worth writing a book about. I'm intending to do that. But in any case, we ended up working with the Red Cross, the Doctors Without Borders in the refugee camp, and through them, I managed to meet some journalists, and then the Norwegian film team made a documentary about this whole exodus,
Right.
and I helped them. I went back with them into Iraq, which was a UN-protected area at the time, and we made a documentary film, was now available actually on the Norwegian state TV
Okay.
archives.
And you were living in the refugee camp still at the time, correct?
Yes, we are living in the refugee camp almost 1 year.
And your sister, I remember you said, was a marine biologist. Is that correct?
No, she was a biologist.
Biologist.
And she knew some things about medicine. So we were helping these also mostly with translation and logistics for the European doctors and nurses. So anyway, I ended up in Norway in 92. And then in 93, we had the peace, the Oslo peace process. You know, in Oslo, the capital of Norway, you had the secret negotiations going on since 1991 between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Nobody knew about them, but then in 93, it was announced under Clinton, President Clinton's presidency. So they were called the Oslo Agreements, and the Palestinian delegations were coming the whole time. By 94, I started working as an interpreter, Arabic, Norwegian, and I even was interpreting for a group of Palestinian children who were coming to Oslo together with Israeli children, joining Arafat and Perez and Sharon, Perez and Rabin, when they were meeting. So they had lots of children there. They had music groups playing classical music from Israel and Palestinian children. So it was interesting that I ended up in that situation without my intention. And then it was at that time the Schiller Institute came to Oslo, and they were warning that the peace process will not survive unless you start with economic development. And that was really a shock for me in a positive sense, because the whole time we were told that the problem with development in our country is that we have corrupt regimes, and unless you change the political system, you will never have economic development.
Right.
And the Schiller Institute said this is nonsense. You cannot change political systems overnight, but you can start digging and building railways, roads, industries, agriculture, water systems, education, and healthcare. That way you can change the whole society. But first you have to give people hope that peace is good for themselves, for their children, and their coming generations. But of course that didn't happen. Lyndon LaRouche, who was the leader of the Schiller Institute, Helge LaRouche, he said, you know, that the people like Sharon and other people on the other side, like Hamas and Jihad, they were circling like vultures over this fragile peace process, waiting for a chance to attack it. And that's what happened. It was vulnerable. The Palestinians didn't get what they were hoping to get. And it was very easy to recruit people to start a war again. So both Sharon on his side and Hamas and Jihad on their side, they started a new war of terrorism against each other. And in that, the peace process was buried. Arafat was, I think he was killed or, you know, forced to into a corner. And that was the end of the peace process. So in that sense, I saw the rise and fall of the peace firsthand, so to speak. And then I said, okay, this is the lesson we have to learn. You cannot go with political change unless you give the people something. And of course, you cannot force countries to change their political and cultural systems, because these are very long-term historic processes. You know, like in Iraq, we have a tribal society now. You cannot have democracy in Iraq because the tribe will vote for their chief.
Right.
Or whoever the chief says, you vote for that guy, okay? Everybody hears me, you vote for that guy. This is our guy.
Yeah.
So you cannot have a system of representative democracy in a tribal society.
Right.
It doesn't work. So anyway, since then, I joined the Schiller Institute, and we were studying and looking back at both as current developments, but also back history. I learned a lot about the history of Iraq, which I didn't learn in school in Iraq.
Yeah.
About the Sumerians, about
you were born near Ur, right? And
yeah,
and that's where the name Iraq is based on, isn't it? The ancient.
Yeah, that's what is said. And the Sumerians are from that area. That's the area where the Sumerians were active. You can still discover by satellite images, you know, there are all these villages and irrigation systems underground.
Yeah.
By ground penetrating radars, you can see them still.
Right.
That's where the Mesopotamian civilizations are. But I knew nothing about that because in school we had these national causes going on. So we, you know, history was, the narrative was different than what is in reality. But the thing, what we learned in the LaRouche movement and with the Schiller Institute is that you have to understand physical economy. And physical economy is not what is taught in school.
Yeah.
So how do you build an economy? How do you sustain an economy? And what is the role of scientific, technological, and cultural advancements in increasing the power, the productive powers of the labor? If you don't understand that, give it up.
Yeah. This is very much related to something I've heard you say before, that, you know, yes, being anti-war and pro-peace, I mean, that's very important, but there has to be plans for the peace. I mean, you know, what are you going to do at peacetime, you know, once the hostilities have ceased this time around?
Yeah.
You know? And
you have to plan for peace already while the war is going on.
Yeah.
When I went to Norway, I went to all these opposition groups, and I asked them, "What is your economic program?" I say, "What economic program? We have a dictator. We have to get rid of the dictator." I said, No. What is your program after the dictator is overthrown? I said, "No, we will think of that later."
Right.
And the funny thing is,
these are the Iraqi groups you're talking about?
Iraqi groups, yeah. But then I started going to all the other groups.
Yeah.
Asking them. And people supporting opposition groups said, "What are you going to do in this country after you overthrow the dictator?" You know, what happens that you have teams of IMF and World Bank and EU experts coming to your country because you know nothing about economy.
Correct.
And these European white people will tell you what you should do.
That's right.
And because they come from countries who are advanced. And you think, okay, we will become like Germany.
That's right. You know, when you talk about development, again, like most people are thinking about like a World Bank plan, an IMF plan, how to reduce the debt, how to increase public services. These very sort of micro things that people are used to thinking about economic plans, which get lost in detail and tedium. But when the LaRouche movement is talking about economic plans, I mean, what you're talking about like is a big view. Fighting desertification in Southwest Asia. I mean, that is like massive. Greening the desert. It's not just, you know, trying to, you know, get squeeze a little extra 50 cents, out of an investment. But you're talking about huge things, creating agriculture again in the Euphrates and Tigris, where it all started.
Yeah. That's how this is. If you look at the New Deal, the United States. That's how the United States became the world's largest economy, most productive economy under Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s. This is how Europe was rebuilt after World War II. Large-scale mega projects and infrastructure, industry, agriculture, water systems, scientific research. We look at a country. This is the method LaRouche taught us. So you look at a government. Okay, what is your program? I looked at the Muslim Brotherhood program in 2013 after Mubarak was overthrown, and I said, this is not going to last more than 1 year.
Right.
So I looked at President Morsi's economic program, and I called it a low-calorie diet for the Egyptian people.
Yeah.
Just to keep them fed and satisfied.
Yeah.
But after 6 months, I said there will be unrest and riots, and then the military will come in, and there will be a new coup.
Yeah.
This is exactly what happened 1 year later, exactly 1 year later.
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's what we have to cope with now. But now there is China use these methods, which we call American political economy methods, American system methods.
Yeah.
Because they are really American in a sense, in the true sense of how the United States originally was thinking before the neoliberals took over.
Yeah.
The
building of the railroad,
the 70s after Kennedy.
Yeah.
Because you had a state-backed credit generation, which is directed towards scientific, breaking frontiers, like the space program.
Yeah.
But you also had large-scale, nationwide, like the highway
dams.
system. You had the canals, all kinds of things. So China comes in, and then they use these methods, and they develop a completely new set of industrial system.
Yeah.
Which takes everybody by, shock.
Yeah.
Anybody who looks at China, anybody who goes to China, or even looks at it from the distance, say, wow, how did they manage this in 30 years? It's possible. But you have to have what we call a dirigistic, state-controlled credit issuing policy, which is directed. You separate money from credit. Credit is building for the future. That has nothing to do with the state budget. That's what's wrong with the IMF and World Bank. They go to these African countries and they say, the African countries say, well, we need to have hospitals. And they say, well, you cannot afford hospitals.
Yeah.
You don't have money in the budget. You have debt.
Yeah.
And you should not take more debt to build hospitals or schools or highways or railways or water systems.
Yeah.
Because they say, you don't have money, no healthcare, sorry.
Yeah.
But a nation has the right to issue credit for productive investment, because that investment will give you back more than what you have taken as credit or loan.
Right. And after how long is it now? Like 60 years or more, maybe 70, 80 years of the World Bank and IMF, directing, development efforts, they have, hardly no success really. And you have IMF riots and stuff. Whereas in China,
it's a disaster.
Yeah, they
look what's going on now.
300 million people out of poverty in 40 years. That's unprecedented in world history.
Yeah,
it's two different approaches to economics. Yeah,
and now China is saying, look, it's like telling the Africans, South Americans, look, we made it. You can make it. There is no difference between us.
Yeah,
you just need to know the clues.
That's right.
Of how you do that. We are willing to assist you. It's beneficial for us and for you.
Yeah, and the way they are, reworking the entire water system in Africa, like taking the lake, I think is it Lake Chad, and then redirecting it to West Africa. It's like how the Chinese civilization was built so many thousands of years ago with the whole canal system, or what you're talking about.
Yeah. No, the plan is to take water from the Congo River, a small portion of the water from the Congo River, and direct it to the Lake Chad, which is drying, which have a desertification spreading. China is doing something similar. They're moving water from the Yangtze River to the north, to the dry north. It's a 10,000 kilometer massive canal for transfer of water, which already existed in a miniature thousands of years ago. So these things are possible. This is what is fascinating about what we learn about physical economics, because what you need is not money. What you need is scientific technological tools to increase the power of labor to build and sustain an economy.
And part of the ideology and the radical environmentalist ideology is so fundamentally opposed to this, because they see humans as evil, as a cancer on the earth, that there are too many humans, and that civilization is bad for the earth. I can give my own story, a project that we've been involved in Trinidad, and in a very, very ecologically sensitive area. And we wanted to show how we could rebuild the whole country. And we had so much opposition from every political party, all the elites, all the bank, everything. And they've tried to stop the project in so many ways. And one was on environmental grounds. And I mean, and we were so much about living in harmony and enhancing the environment, but they were saying how we would, destroy everything, because it was on the most ecologically sensitive part in the island, on a mountainside, Amazon type rainforest and so forth. And when the environmental ministry came to check it out, they saw that the wildlife actually increased because of our presence. They saw, because we made sure that the there was no poachers. We made sure that the fruit trees that the animals liked were there, and so all of a sudden life became more abundant because of our purposeful intervention, as opposed to what it was before. And this is totally lost, in the current discourse on the environment. Yeah.
No, nature is not always intelligent. Look at the deserts.
Yeah.
If you leave it for nature, nature will not make it green.
Yeah.
There will not be more biodiversity.
And we are part of nature. We are nature's intelligence. We are the embodiment of universal intelligence. I mean, so we are Buckminster Fuller is someone who the American philosopher and engineer and scientist. I love him, and he said that human beings are the incarnation of the universe becoming self-aware. So the universe becomes aware of its own laws through the human mind, and becoming purposeful in the unfolding of creation, of evolution, and that is, this other thing sees us as a parasite, as that we are some evil blight on the world.
No, I think, you see, I want to say two things. First of all, Earth is not our mother. When people say Mother Earth, Gaia is not our mother.
Right.
The sun is our mother.
Right.
In Mesopotamian mythology, it's called Shamash, the sun, and it's female. I think in European language, the sun is male, but in the Mesopotamian and Arabic language, the sun is female. Okay. That's our mother. Yeah, it's not our God. God forbid. I'm not saying that. It's our mother, because we are a heliocentric civilization.
Right.
We are part of the sun, and as Kepler says, Johannes Kepler, scientist who developed the idea of the universal gravitation, not Newton. He says that the sun is the force which is moving the solar system.
Right.
And to understand the solar system, you need to understand this physical force.
Yes.
And how it affects each planet and how the planets affect each other. The other thing is that we are living inside the atmosphere of the sun.
Yes.
If there's a hiccup on the sun, like these mass ejection explosions, it will affect us here on Earth.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that the United Nations Climate Panel, they excluded the sun from their calculations. Yeah. All the climate people, they say, well, we first disregard the sun.
Yeah.
And then we disregard the cosmic radiation, because their effect is nothing.
Yeah.
Imagine Earth without the sun,
Yes. That'd be like a fish ignoring the water.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole thing is a hoax. No, we are part of the creative universe.
Yeah.
Only human beings are capable, because the universe is susceptible to our intervention.
Yeah.
It's susceptible to change. It's prone to our intervention.
Yeah.
I think one thing fascinating about the famous saying by the scientist Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, I said, we are in the best of all possible worlds.
Yes.
Worlds. What I understand by that is that because there is a possibility of change.
Yes.
Because we are not bound by so-called laws of nature.
Yeah.
We can adapt the laws of nature to our aims, to our goals, and for our development. We understand the laws of the universe. We adapt them to increase our power in the universe. We can make the world more beautiful, more productive, more green. That's something.
Yeah.
Other people can destroy nature.
Correct.
That's another question.
We can use it both ways. We can use it to destroy. Yes. We can use it to enhance. the universe is self-unfolding, or we can use it for destruction. So yeah.
Exactly. And that's why we are in the best of all possible worlds, because the world is prone to our intervention to change it. We are not forced by so-called limited natural resources. This is no limitation.
That's right.
As Kraft Erika, the space visionary and pioneer, he says, you know, the only limits that exist in nature are the limits we put on ourselves and our species.
Yeah. Yeah.
With
and
scientific development, we can break these rules.
That's right.
Look at any raw material.
Human story is not ended at all.
No.
In fact, we're just perhaps in the beginning of the human story, if you know. And
yeah,
so
we are still, in a sense, as Helga says, you know, or Friedrich Schiller, the philosopher, mankind is still not reached its adulthood.
Yes.
We are still teenagers in sense of history.
Yeah.
Because we are still quarreling about stupid things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like kids do in school.
That's right. That's
We
right.
have not matured into a completely rational species yet.
So now let's put the developments in Syria within this context. So now, of course, the mainstream media is seeing this as a terrible disaster, Turkey invading, US abdicating its responsibility, abandoning its allies, the Kurds, so that they will be oppressed by both the Syrians and Turkey, and ISIS is now going to rise because of this, and it's totally irresponsible. It's going to be more and more chaos, and Trump has done the worst thing ever, right? So now, what is wrong with all of that?
What is wrong with that is that people don't understand that we can change.
Right.
That humans change, situations change, powers change, and everything change. Everything depends on our outlook of the world. If you have a leadership which has a different outlook of the world, things will change.
Right.
Now, President Trump, whatever you think about him, he took the right decision to pull out of Syria, and he has said it openly. He wants to end. That's why he was elected in the first place. Yeah. He told the American people, I'm going to end these endless, worthless, costly wars, which cost us thousands of soldiers, but also cost the peoples of those nations millions of lives, which is completely true. So he was elected on that basis. Also, of course, selecting, saving the U.S. economy, which is his Achilles heel. Still, he hasn't fixed the American economy. But on that point, the American people support him. Everybody's happy with that. The thing is that people who say this is terrible, this is that, they don't understand history. They don't understand human nature, that we are actually capable of changing, because they look at everything as static.
Yeah.
It's like you have the Kurds, you have the Turks, you have this, you have that. The United States. I was just interviewed by an Iranian newspaper and said, what difference does it make? The United States always does these bad things. I said, look, you can't say the United States. The United States is full of fights and conflicts and different groups now fighting against each other. There is no United States.
Yeah.
The United States can itself change. We are not bound by anything. We can change our ways of doing things. Yeah. And people who analyze the situation from what was going on 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, or 1 year ago are all mistaken.
Yeah.
You have to look at it from where we are heading.
Right.
And because we were involved in trying to stop these wars of regime change in Syria, we supported Syria. We actually we were against the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
Because we were involved in this and trying to outline a peace plan for the future. We can analyze this from the inside process. And therefore, people who think Erdogan is a bad guy, well, Erdogan today is not the same Erdogan 5 years ago. Yes, 5 years ago, Erdogan worked with Obama administration, with the British and the French and the Swedes here in Sweden, the peace-loving government, and the Saudis and Qataris, and the United Arab Emirates, and some Sudanese, to create what we then developed into this horrendous, what people call ISIS, the Al-Nusra, these terrorist organizations. regime change.
Yeah.
First, going into Libya, destroying Libya.
So Turkey wasn't doing it by itself. It was part of the whole NATO regime change operation in Syria. Although people were trying to blame it and pin it on Turkey, but Turkey is part of NATO.
Turkey
anyway.
was saying, okay, there's an opportunity here for us to play a game. Erdogan and his Muslim Brotherhood clique, they had their vision of this pan-Islamic state, where the Ottomans or whoever is like, they will be from Morocco to Indonesia. We will have this massive Islamic empire. And he was in that illusion, but at the same time, he found an opportunity that everybody needs them. Yeah. So Turkey was the channel through which the arms, the terrorists, the money, everything went through. It's like Pakistan was during the Afghan wars.
That's right.
And Pakistan is still suffering from that, playing that role.
Yeah.
And Imran Khan now says, we are no longer going to accept that. We don't want to be involved in these kind of dirty wars. And then the whole thing started when, after Libya, of course, Iraq was already destroyed. And you had Al-Qaeda starting a business in Iraq. Yeah. Thanks to George W. Bush's and Tony Blair's intervention.
Yeah.
And then you had all these operations called, it's funny, the CIA, they have such creative ways of finding names for the operation. The operation is called Timber Sycamore.
Yeah.
Which is the poor tree, it's being, the operation is called after a tree, which is, the poor tree is now associated with the most bloody operation. So the operation was to transport arms, which were left by Gaddafi's army, and militants who were already in Libya and who came to Libya from all parts of the world and Europe and Britain and France, and they came to Libya. So they were taken in Qatari, Saudi, and Turkish airplanes from Libya into Turkey and then into Syria. Yeah. The CIA was standing at the gate, it's like waiting, trying to figure out who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, and give them weapons.
And in fact, in the Western Hemisphere, Trinidad and Tobago has been one of the largest exporters of ISIS fighters, which is a terrible thing from our end as well. Yeah. Yeah. And then there were operations started to buy weapons from Serbia, Bulgaria, other places, by CIA connected and other organizations, to buy weapons and ship them to Turkey or Jordan, and then into Syria. So this whole operation was orchestrated by the United States and NATO, the British, French, and everybody was saying these are freedom fighters. So the whole place, both Iraq and Syria, were completely taken over by these terrorist gangs. Yeah. If you remember, Michael Moore, President Trump's first national security advisor, who was then chased by the FBI and Mueller and almost put in prison. Yeah. He did one important thing, and because he was the head of the military intelligence in the region, especially in Iraq, and he looked at the situation and he gave a report in 2012 and to the Obama administration, look, what we are doing, what already has been done in Iraq, and what we are doing in Syria by supporting, because the border area between Iraq and Syria, the border was erased. Yeah. So the groups supporting the Syrian revolution from inside Iraq, these Sunni areas, which then joined ISIS, was completely merged into these Syrian terrorist organizations. And Michael Flynn said, this is going to lead to the creation of an Islamic terrorist state in that region. Yeah. The Obama administration told them to shut up. Yeah. I mean, Michael Flynn knew all this stuff. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, where was he before he became caliphate? He was in the U.S. prison in Baghdad called Camp Bucca. Right. It's like Abu Ghraib. Yeah. This is where all who became then the brutal ISIS murderers, they were tortured and brainwashed in Abu Ghraib in Camp Bucca. Right. And then they were released. Some people say, the prison was invaded by the supporters of the Al-Qaeda. They were released. Right. With rage and lust for blood. Yeah. Against everybody. Now tell me, you I know in an earlier interview you talked about Trump in, I believe it was the 2017 Riyadh conference and the importance of that. Could you just reiterate that here?
Yeah, okay. I think what Trump intention was, I'm not privy to Trump, I'm not his insider, but I think his intention, and this is what happened, and I said it at the time, Trump's first visit after being elected, it was to Saudi Arabia, a very strange place to start as a US president.
Yeah.
But it seemed for me that he's on a big operation. Because what he said in Riyadh, he brought in all the Muslim nation leaders except for Iran.
Yeah.
And then he said that the support for terrorism should stop.
Yeah.
What he was talking about actually is the development of so-called Salafist jihadism since the Afghan war, since 1979, when the CIA and MI6 of Britain worked with the Saudis and other Arab and Muslim countries to train and finance and arm large groups of mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan.
That's right.
That was the big geopolitical game of Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Yeah, I mean, just for listeners who aren't aware of all these terms of Salafists and Wahhabis, I don't think you mentioned the Wahhabis, but it's in the Muslim Brotherhood. It's very interesting. Although the U.S. calls Iran the biggest sponsor of terror, all the terrorist groups and all these incidents are done by Sunni Muslims, not Shia. Iran are basically Shia, and these Sunnis is not the majority of Sunni, but these Salafist, Wahhabi fringe groups that are part of the Sunni branch. And so whenever they talk about Iran, it has nothing to do with Al-Nusra, with Al-Qaeda, with ISIS. It has, but because people don't know the differences between these groups, they're conflating all of it together, which is why so many people thought that, you know, Saddam Hussein had something to do with Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, you know, and it's just, you know, the confusion with all these groups, you know, the Taliban being a Pashtun group, not even an Arab, you know. So so it's very important to note the distinctions, and that's a very important point. He didn't invite Iran to the Riyadh meeting. Talked about stopping terrorism to all. Yeah,
he attacked Iran. Actually, he said Iran is the biggest sponsor of terrorism, but everybody in the room, like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Erdogan, Pakistan, everybody knew he was talking to them.
That's right. That's right. And anybody who knows, a lot with Trump. He's like saying one thing, but he's sending a message in another way. Yeah.
And immediately after that, what you had, and one more important thing that happened before Trump was elected is that the Russian president decided in September 2015, and I remember that very well. I think for 25th or 26th of September 2015, President Putin said, we have an agreement now with the Syrian government and army to support it against these terrorist groups. So Russia moved all its military might, put all its military might, and at the risk of a world war, moved into Syria.
Yeah.
Immediately with massive deployment of airplanes.
Because Hillary Clinton was threatening world war with that.
Yes. He was taking the risk because he said, this is it. After what we saw in Libya, because in Libya, Russia and China did not veto the resolution to invade, but they said, we will stand on the sidelines.
Yeah.
This is not our business. But then it came to Libya, to Syria, the Russians and the Chinese realized that this is it. Because, and remember, 2014, 1 year earlier, the Ukraine Nazi coup took place with the support of the Obama administration and the EU.
That's right.
And now the war was moved to the borders of Russia.
Yeah.
So Russia said, okay, now we draw the line. This is it. And I told my colleagues, I think I even wrote about it, history has changed since that moment. Right. All these wars of regime change will not work anymore.
Yeah.
Because Russia is ready to risk everything, including a world war, to stop this crazy policy. And they managed, with the help of Iran and Syria, to retake big parts of Syria from these terrorists.
Yeah.
They bombed all the oil, which is going from the oil fields to Turkey, to Erdogan's family friends who were selling it and giving the money to ISIS. Now the US wants to do the similar thing, sell oil to Turkey and finance the Kurdish. It's not going to work. This is just a big joke. The Syrian oil fields stuff, I can tell you about it, but that's not. Anyway, but what Putin did changed the whole game.
Right.
So nobody anymore could forcefully intervene from Turkey or Jordan into Syria, because the Russian airspace force was flying over there. Although they didn't have soldiers on the ground, they were capable of shooting anybody who will bring in weapons into Syria. So Trump comes in.
Yeah. Hillary was talking about shooting down Russian planes. I remember that.
Yeah. I mean, the shooting of the Russian plane by the Turkish Air Force was a gift to Putin to start blowing hot air onto the neck of Erdogan.
Yes.
And that made Erdogan think twice, because there are economic sanctions, there were the whole gas pipeline issues, the tourists from Russia going to Turkey. It was effective. So Putin said, look, we're not going to shoot your airplanes. Now you've got to behave. We are neighbors. Your future is with us, not with the United States, not with the British. Your future is working with us. That's what he told Erdogan. And I think Erdogan started to change that. But with Trump coming in and telling everybody from now on, this old game of exporting terrorists all over the planet to defeat and fight against, destabilize others we don't like. This ends now. And it ended immediately. And then they scapegoated Qatar.
Right.
Because the Saudis, the Emirates, and everybody was saying, oh yeah, well, this was terrible what happened to Syria. It's the Qataris.
Yes.
They are the ones who have been financing and arming ISIS. The Qataris willingly took that responsibility.
Right.
So everybody else was washing their hands, and then they stopped their operations in Syria. The Syrian militant groups were told, like in Daraa in southern Syria, late last year, you either join the Syrian army in fighting against Al-Qaeda, or we will not support you anymore.
Right.
This is what the U.S. Army told the militants in southern Syria. That's how they joined the Syrian army. The Syrian army, if you told them, if you come back, we will not shoot you.
Yeah.
You can fight on our side, but there are these bad guys.
Right.
We get rid of them. You have the whole Golan Heights.
And
the Israelis were told, stop supporting those guys.
These ISIS groups were previously funded by the United States, correct?
Not directly,
okay.
No. The funding comes from the Gulf countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and others, but they were exporting oil. They took over the Syrian oil fields and Iraqi oil fields in Western Iraq. And there were thousands and thousands of trucks taking oil from these oil fields into Turkey. And there were people in Erdogan's family receiving them very cheap, like $30 a barrel, where price in the market is $60 a barrel.
Right.
But they're willing to pay ISIS $30 a barrel. But ISIS was flush with money.
Yeah.
And the weapons would come from these timber sycamore kind of operations where the CIA and others, they would give arms to the so-called moderate opposition groups. So what happens, the moderate opposition groups end up in a clash with ISIS, and ISIS takes their weapons like taking cookies from a kid.
Yeah.
And then they will, the moderate the moderate opposition will go back to the CIA guys on the border with Syria and say, oh, uncle, the ISIS, they took our weapons, give us some more weapons.
Right.
That's what was going on.
So that, because of your long association with Kurds in Iraq, I think you'd probably have a good insight into the Kurdish situation with Syria. So could you give us your understanding of what's going on there and the whole discourse about the abandonment of the Kurds, about the establishment of Kurdistan? Please give me your take on all of that.
Yeah, the whole question of Kurdistan has been a geopolitical game, a tool.
Yeah.
It has not been in the interest of the Kurdish people, because they just keep being beaten the whole time, because you have a lobby in the United States and Europe which tells the Kurds, you should fight for your independence.
Right.
You should fight for Kurdistan. But they're sitting in cafes in London and in Paris and telling the Kurdish woman, you should go fight.
Right.
And we will go out demonstrating every Saturday for you.
Yeah. So just to be clear for viewers and listeners who may not be familiar. So the Kurds are a minority group, and they're found in Iraq, in Turkey, and Syria mainly. Is it those three countries?
And Iran.
And Iran as well. And
Yes.
they want to carve out places in each of those four countries.
Yes.
Well, at least there are people, and supported by the U.S. media and State Department, it seems.
There was never an intention to create the Kurdistan.
Right.
But the Kurdish leaders and groups were always given the hope.
Yeah.
If you play with us, we will help you make your Kurdistan. Mm-hmm. Kissinger double-crossed the Kurds in 1974.
Right.
He made Iraq and Iran to make a deal. And then the Iranians, the Shah, who was supporting the Kurds in Iraq against the Iraqi government, suddenly told them, sorry, we have an agreement. We get half of the Shatt al-Arab River in southern Iraq in return for abandoning you.
Yeah.
And the Kurds suddenly, after receiving weapons from Iran, the US ally, they suddenly had to leave.
Yeah.
So they have been double-crossed many, 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 many times. Every power. Look, in the Iran-Iraq war, the Iraqi side was supporting the Kurds in the Iranian side.
Yeah.
The Iranians were supporting the Kurds in the Iraqi side.
Right.
The Syrians were supporting the Kurds fighting against Turkey.
Yeah.
So the Kurdish leadership, and also you have to understand that the Kurds in Iraq are not exactly the same as, even in language terms, the Kurds in Turkey.
Okay.
They are different. I don't understand the Kurdish spoken in Turkey.
Right.
Even in parts of Syria. It's very difficult for me. Even inside Iraq, in Duhok, for example, where people speak Bahdinani or Kermanji, it's not the same as Sorani.
Right.
These are different. Even within the Kurdish, we have divisions.
Right.
But there are also political divisions. Right. But remember,
and this is much different than accents. This is like, it would be like the difference between French and Spanish.
Yeah, it's more than accent, yes. Yeah. In some cases, it's more than accent. But I'm not saying that there is no Kurdish ethnic group. There is.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they are part of now nation states.
Yes.
They are part of Iran, they are part of Iraq, they are part of Syria, and part of Turkey. These are historic realities.
I don't want to get off topic, but to me it sounds a bit like the Kashmir issue with India and Pakistan, and even some of the southern separatists in India, maybe a bit like what's happening in Hong Kong. They take these small groups to destabilize, and Chechen, what was happening, and then the Bosnia, Kosovo independence, all these things to destabilize larger entities. And this seems like yet another example of that. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, the thing is that because these other cases, they are not ethnically different,
right,
than the people of the rest of the country. But here, they're ethnically different. They have a different language culture. They have a different. But the best solution for the Kurds is to have autonomy within their nation states. Like the Kurds in Iraq now, they have full autonomy.
Yeah.
The Kurds in Iraq were telling the PKK, please don't come into our territories, the PKK were Turkish Kurds, and disturb us. We are happy with what we have.
Right.
You know, don't create trouble for us. They were shooting at them.
Yeah.
So the Kurds in Syria, but remember when Trump announced that he's going to withdraw from Syria, it was not now, it was a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it was sabotage.
Yeah.
Remember that Trump has been attacking in the last 2 weeks the military-industrial complex.
That's right. That's right.
No American president has done that since Eisenhower.
Absolutely.
President Kennedy didn't even manage to say the words. Mm-hmm. He was shot by them.
Correct.
But Trump now saying the military-industrial complex is very happy with all these wars because they make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the media and the political swamp in Washington loves the military-industrial complex. That's right. Why they are against stopping these wars. But anyway, when Trump announced that, the Syrian army was closing in on these areas,
Right.
and with the Russian support.
Yeah.
So the Kurds, with the help of Russia, started negotiations already last year. I reported on that.
Yeah. So
In
now,
March this year.
yeah, would you say that that ISIS is, the media is saying that ISIS is growing because of the U.S. pullout? That doesn't sound right at all.
ISIS in Iraq and in Syria is finished.
Yeah,
doesn't exist.
Exactly. It's just a
the only reason ISIS was created and existed is because of support of the United States, Britain, and other
correct
countries.
I think I've heard you
drive
say
that up. Trump stopped that.
Yeah, and I think I've heard you say, which is a great argument, that no terrorist group in the region would think of creating an entire, caliphate without the support of great powers behind them.
Never ever in the history of mankind.
Yeah.
In modern history, because terrorism looks like a new phenomenon, because you have nation states. Terrorism is never a private enterprise.
Yeah.
Terrorist groups are state-owned enterprises, SOEs.
Yeah. Yeah.
How? Because you cannot, if you don't have the support of a state or a group of states who have military, intelligence, financial, security, and other powers. For example, if you want to move from one country to the other, you cannot move with your weapons. You cannot move without passports.
That's right.
So somebody facilitates that for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Get into the airport, somebody takes you the back door. Who's that? It's not a corrupt person who's doing it for money. This is state intelligence services.
Yeah.
We talked about the whole Afghan Mujahideen thing. Yeah. This was a massive operation involving the intelligence services of many superpowers.
And this reminds me too of something that I realized by looking at maps and drug areas, that wherever you see a lawless area of the world, whether it be in Balochistan in Pakistan or Afghanistan, or what the Najib area was in Arabia, that's where you have drug running, where you have smuggling. I mean, that's where you have organized crime controlling the area, yes. International organized crime. So that these
you need banks.
Yes, exactly. It's not just pure chaos. There's actually organization behind the apparent chaos. Yeah, yes, you're right.
And you need the banking system.
Yeah.
To launder the money.
Yeah. Like HSBC was caught red-handed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was formed for pushing opium into China in the first place. Yes. And to this day in Mexico, they had a window for the drug dealers to deposit their money, found under the Obama administration, and they got a little fine. Exactly. It was amazing.
And then most states create slush funds. It's like this fantasy of the defense secretary of the United States or whoever who told him about this idea, because they're trying to sell a business idea to Trump. Oh, we take the money from the oil, because oil is like a magic word.
Yeah.
And then we take the money from the oil and we give it to the Kurds.
Yeah.
Or we give it to other organized, because you cannot ask Congress to give you money to finance a terrorist group.
So that's like the Iran-Contra thing from the 80s. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
Selling the drugs.
So terrorism, including ISIS, would never, ever had existed on their own resources.
Yeah. Now,
the reason they were defeated now is because the states who were supporting them were told, got it.
Yeah.
No more. Let the Syrian army and the Russian army take care of that. Clean it up.
Now, this is interesting to something else I've heard you say in other interviews, where you talk about where you believe right now this can be a real important inflection point in history, because this might be a point where jihadism is finally cleared up. Because a lot of people think that, this has been happening for thousands of years, but no, it has not been. The Middle East was not a a boiling pot of conflicts for all this time. For hundreds of years, it was a peaceful place. But it's only since the breakup of the Anglo-Zionist attempt to break up the Ottoman Empire, that's when all the Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah. So can you elaborate on that?
This whole thing started with the British coming into the picture.
Yeah.
Because for the British, it was important to encounter, because after World War I, especially, you had national liberation movements going on in Egypt, in Iraq, in Iran, in all these Muslim countries. They want to be liberated from British and French colonialism.
Right.
So the British invented Islamism.
Right.
Because Islamism has no nation states. It's from Morocco to Indonesia. Well, perfect for the British. They say, okay, you can have your Islamic empire, but under the Queen's skirts.
Yeah.
So
I thought
they created this Islamism.
I thought the British were funding a lot of these nationalist groups against the Ottoman Empire as well. Is that correct?
No, not really. They were supporting tribes.
Right.
Fighting against the
Ottomans.
The Ottomans, like in the Gulf, they were giving them arms.
Yeah.
So, but they created all kinds of other groupings to fight against the Ottomans. But they were against nationalism in the Arab world. So they called any nationalist leader a God-denying communist.
Right.
Like Jamal Abdel Nasser, like Abdul Karim Qasim in Iraq, in Syria. So anybody who would fight for nationalism, they will, unleash on him the dogs of Islam they say these are God-denying communists.
Yeah.
That was part of the Cold War. That's why the Muslim Brotherhood was supported so much by the British and American intelligence
and
to fight against Egyptian leaders, Iraq, and others.
Yeah.
So the important thing now is that we have now a turning point. There's a new paradigm. Remember this word. There is a new paradigm in international relations, both economic and strategic.
Yeah.
And that new paradigm is now very dramatically taking place in Syria as an effect. It's not going to start from Syria. Syria is an effect of what I said, Russia's intervention and what China has done.
Yeah.
China has revolutionized international economic relations.
Yeah.
Replacing this old paradigm of imperialism, of IMF and World Bank control.
Yeah, just as an interjection here, I read somebody who's talked about economics in the 20th century, and they said, the greatest economist of the 20th century, and perhaps in history, is Deng Xiaoping. What he did was incredible. Yeah, so yes. I mean, just to reiterate.
We have now a situation where the whole old geopolitical game is being defeated. Because most importantly, if the United States, that's what Lyndon LaRouche said, he said, if the United States is not involved in changing this game, it will not happen. Yeah. As long as the United States is on the opposite side, it's not going to happen.
That's right.
And that's what Democrats and liberals in the say collusion between Trump and Russia. Well, it's a good kind of collusion. But you remember what Tony Blair declared in '97, which led to all these terrible regime change. He said that the era of the Peace of Westphalia is over.
The right
what is the era of the Peace of Westphalia? That nations are sovereign and independent.
Yeah.
You have no right to interfere in their affairs.
Yeah.
Especially militarily. He said, that's over. We decide. If there is a dictator, if there's a bad guy, we go in and we take him out. And that's what happened in Iraq. That's what happened in Libya.
Liberal imperialism.
Yes, liberal imperialism, responsibility to protect. Now, where is Tony Blair today?
Yeah.
It's very interesting to find out.
I don't know exactly. Do you know where?
No, but the system he proposed died after 20 years.
Yeah.
Thank God. There was a lot of destruction, but 20 years, that's enough.
Yeah.
Now we have the era of nation states taking control of their territories, their economic policies. I think that's it, because President Trump was responding to the Chinese president. Chinese president said, we have to respect nation states. Trump says in a recent speech in the UN, he said the new era is for the patriots,
that's
not
right.
for the globalists.
And you said the greatest defense against globalism and protector of democracy is the nation state. Yeah,
Yes.
I think
so now we have the system of nation states coming back, but working together for a common future for mankind. That's what President Xi Jinping calls it. A community of a shared future for all mankind. And this is fantastic situation. And Syria could become the inflection point in that sense, but also could become the good example besides Yemen, which I think is going to be also resolved. Russia is very active there. I think the Chinese are very active. They are trying to get the Saudis and Emirates to understand that this is an obsolete war. You cannot win that war. And the US Congress is opposed to Trump on that point, which I agree with the Congress on that, against Trump, because I think Trump is wrong on the Yemen question and his friendship with Saudi Arabia. Anyway, not everything Trump does or says is correct. That's right. I hope people don't misunderstand me. But that's what I mean. People who try to analyze everything Trump said and does from the standpoint that he's a bad guy, you will never understand what he's doing.
Exactly.
The same thing with Erdogan, the same thing with Putin, the same thing with anybody else. So there's new paradigm that there will be sovereign nations dictating their own economic policy, but in coordination with each other.
Yeah.
And the new Silk Road and the Belt and Road has proven to be the best way of developing nations, of building economic relations among nations.
No, I just want to I want to backtrack a little just from something you said, just about the PKK, the Kurds, Turkey. Now, in my view, and it's kind of bringing these strands together, Turkey has a legitimate right to stop the PKK Kurdish terrorists from destabilizing Turkey, and that they've been funded from inside Syria, and that this Turkish incursion into Syria is part of the stabilization of the region, just like how in Pakistan terrorists have been used to come in both into Afghanistan, into India, just being a hub of terrorism. Northern Syria was being used that way. Do you agree with that analysis, that is the importance of the Turkish action?
Yeah, well, the Turkish action has different aspects, because the Turks, they want to create a new situation where they can use at the negotiations table later against the Syrian government. They have their ambitions, but what they could get at least is that there will be no Kurdish military moves south of their border.
Okay.
So they want guarantees that this will not happen.
Right.
Not only that there will be no attacks, but that there will be no organization called Kurdish Defense Forces or Kurdish whatever.
Yeah.
No Kurdish political movements.
Right. For an independent Kurdistan, yeah.
Yeah. Right. So the Russians told them that was, but look, the Kurds in Syria will be part of the Syrian state.
Yes.
The Syrian state has laws against terrorism.
Yeah.
And there's an old agreement between Turkey and Syria from 1998, in October 1998, because there was a huge tension between Turkey and Syria at the time, that the Turks threatened to attack Syria militarily because the PKK, who were supported by Syria at the time, they had camps in Syria. Their leader, Abdullah Öcalan, was living in Syria. And the Turks said, look, you either shut down all that operation or we will invade you.
Yeah.
So other countries like Egypt and Iran intervened to convince the Syrians to pay attention to the Turkish concerns.
Yeah.
So there was the Adana Agreement signed, which stipulated that Syria stops all support for these Kurdish militants.
Right. The
leader should be deported, which happened, and then he was later arrested. And in, I think, Appendix 4, it says the Turkish army, in case there are terrorist incidents, has the right to chase those terrorists into Syrian territory, but only for 5 kilometers, not 30 as Erdogan says.
Yeah.
I don't think the Turkish army now is 30 kilometers into Syria. That's just a bluff.
Right.
They are inside Syria, but they are still on the border areas. The Syrian army has reached the border. So the Kurds in in Syria, they will be part of the political process now, which is the guardians of that is called the Astana process.
Right.
Russia, Iran, and Turkey, because they control the different groupings, or they have influence in the different groupings. And today and yesterday, there was a conference in Geneva to prepare for a meeting of all the opposition groups under the auspices of the UN, but with Russia, Iran, Turkey being the sponsors of it, to start a constitutional commission.
Great. Now,
so the Kurds in Iraq will not be a threat to Turkey anymore. This is what Erdogan can go home and say, okay, look, we at least secured that.
So this is the important thing, and the achievement of stability in the region then becomes the precursor for development and the vision that you've been talking about. Yeah. So I mean, there are certain things that I'd like you to talk about that I've heard you describe elsewhere. Like, for instance, you have these huge sovereign wealth funds in the region, but they've been used in Wall Street and City of London for speculation rather than building the area. And then you have these visions of fighting desertification, of extending the Belt and Road Initiative, and that seeing the area as a crossroads of civilization rather than a clash of civilization. And it's right by the Tigris and Euphrates where human civilization, it's one of the points where it began, definitely. So can you expand on this as to, with the stability, what can happen now?
Yeah, now this is the question we talked about, the opposition groups, when you ask them, what is your economic program when there is peace?
Yeah.
So we already have outlined, actually, Mr. LaRouche since the 70s was talking about peace through economic development. But even under the war in Syria, at its height, we produced what we call the Operation Phoenix, the bird of Phoenix, which will rise from the ashes, because we could foresee that Syria will defeat the terrorism.
Yeah.
And we made
what year was that? What year was that?
2014. Okay. We started with this. And my colleague traveled to Syria, actually, and met with the advisor of President Assad and the prime minister and speaker of the parliament of Syria, and presented our plan for how Syria can rebuild Syria by connecting it to the Belt and Road, the new Silk Road. The Syrian president had, before the war, the so-called 5 Cs strategy, which is Syria is located between the Mediterranean, the Gulf, the Red Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, and so on, between all these seas, and then it can connect north and south and east and west through Syria, which is fantastic. So the Aleppo, for example, Palmyra was the final destination of the old Silk Road.
Okay.
All the caravans will stop in Palmyra in Syria. But also Aleppo. We produced a film which is called Aleppo, the Eternal City, which incorporated, before Aleppo was liberated, actually, because we could foresee that Aleppo will be free soon. Yeah. So we produced this film called Aleppo, the Eternal City, where we situated the whole thing in Aleppo's role historically as part of the Silk Road. So the nations of the region now need massive reconstruction operations. They have own resources. As you said, we have the Gulf countries. There are $3 trillion of sovereign wealth fund oil money, which is not invested, not even in their own countries.
Yeah.
It's invested in Europe, in London, and Wall Street.
And,
that can be used. We propose to create an Arab infrastructure and reconstruction bank with a capital of $100 billion.
Wow.
That should be enough as a start capital. But then nations can start their own national reconstruction banks where they can issue national credit internally with the support of the regional bank. So their credit becomes creditworthy because there is a supporting organ. They will have support from China, Russia, and hopefully Europe and the United States. So they can issue their own credit for the reconstruction plans. They can utilize their position, their natural resources, and human resources for industrialization process.
Yeah.
We can have nuclear power development using oil and gas as industrial material rather than burning it, which is a very stupid thing. If you have a better source of energy, you don't have to.
As you said, by a barrel of oil, instead of $50, if you burn it as fuel, could be $500 if you use it for industrial
Plastics,
yeah,
chemical materials. You can produce all kinds of things from a barrel of oil, which can be used in hospitals.
Yeah,
it can be used in cars. It can be used in schools. It can be used as furniture.
Yeah,
everything with a much higher value than burning it. It's like wood.
Yeah.
When we were reliant on wood, we were burning trees. But now, when we found coal afterwards, used wood for building houses, building furniture.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So that's where people don't get it. That we don't have limited resources. We don't have one planet. We have many planets.
And then with fusion power in particular, or even nuclear fission, you can use that for desalinization and green the desert and grow food. And that's part of your plan, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, with fusion power, already as fission power, we can start that. But with fusion power, you'll have unlimited energy supply for desalination of the seawater, producing fresh water, both for urban use, but also for agriculture. And you can utilize the other materials as industries. So this region has all the potential for developing already now. So what is required is that this new paradigm becomes part of the international, that we replace the whole international, because the EU and the United States are still opposed to this new paradigm.
Yeah.
Europe, the EU doesn't want to be part of the Belt and Road.
Yeah.
The United States, even Trump, has these trade wars. Hopefully they will end. You don't know.
Yeah.
But President Trump's conception of trade and economy is very, very problematic. And I think that's what will bring him down, if it does at all, because his understanding of economy is very limited. He looks at the stock markets and says, "Oh, we have wonderful numbers." It's like when a friend of mine said, "Oh, you look at the cancer and say, oh, the cancer is growing. Great." Tell me about the patient.
Yeah.
How is the patient doing? The patient is the American infrastructure, the population, the healthcare, the education.
Yeah.
That's where the patient is. The stock market is the cancer. So you can't show me the numbers and Trump says, "Oh, look at the numbers in the stock market." Well, you are showing me that the cancer is growing. Sorry, Mr. President.
Yeah.
We will have to take care about the patient.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, yeah, that's so that's I mean, that whole understanding is so missing, I think, from, I mean, well, obviously the drive to war, the geopolitics, it just takes people away from this larger vision you have, So I mean, in sum, if we were to summarize what's going on in the Middle East right now, not only of what could be, but what is actually going. So do you see that this is actually moving forward, or is this just a sort of dream at the moment? How do you see it?
Well, in some areas it's becoming true, like as we said in Syria, and I trust very much that the Syrian leadership have a very good understanding of economics, because before this war, Syria was almost self-sufficient.
Right.
Food, other industrial products, not sophisticated industry, but they were self-sufficient. They had no debt, foreign debt.
Yeah.
But we have other places where both because of the situation in the region, like in Lebanon. Lebanon was the first victim of both this war in Syria and liberal economics.
Yeah.
Lebanon is a colony of the banks.
Yeah.
It's a dictatorship of the banks. And that's what people are going out with posters saying, we don't want the dictatorship of the bank, which is true. We have in Iraq now, young people, hundreds of thousands of people going out demonstrating, because after 15 years of the invasion of Iraq and US, British, and other, we still don't have electricity for everyone. We don't have water. There are no jobs.
Yeah.
The desert is creeping on the cities. We don't have agriculture anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So the lack of understanding both of the geopolitics will destroy it. But even when you have, it's like people in Lebanon say, oh, we have to get rid of corruption. Fine. What are you going to do when you get rid of corruption?
That's right.
How are you going to build your economy? So the lack of understanding of what the basics of economy, a nation's economy, that's a big problem. And that would be our biggest problem to deal with. Because even with getting rid of all these sound effects or other effects like geopolitics, regime change, and wars, we still are not in the safe waters, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I trust that China's intervention, who have a very good understanding of physical economics, that it's not money which builds bridges, it's materials, technology, and intelligent workforce, that's what build bridges. And the Russians also have a good understanding of this economic aspect, although less than China. But that this new paradigm will help us as the LaRouche movement to come to educate people. And this is something I'm going to start in Arabic. I can announce it on your show.
Yeah, great.
I'm going to start a LaRouche School of Physical Economics in Arabic for Arabic listeners, and we intend to have cooperation with Arab organizations, universities, if they wish, because that is the big issue. This is when I came to Oslo as a refugee, and I learned this thing, and I ask everybody, what is your economic program?
Yeah.
That's what every citizen should know, because you cannot just attack politicians and say, we don't have water, electricity. You should educate your politicians. You have to know the basics in order to be able to, you become a leader yourself. You can give advice to your government. That's why we are capable of, we designed the Yemen reconstruction plan. Any intelligent economist said, wow, this is fantastic and it's applicable. We can do this.
Yeah.
It's possible. The Chinese are looking at this plan. Even the Saudi side, I know people in London now studying our Yemen reconstruction plan. I don't know why. They want to plagiarize parts of it, use it for propaganda maybe, but I don't trust their intentions. But these ideas are being studied because any sane person understands that this is what you need to do to build your economy, to increase the productivity and prosperity of your society. And this is not like a pie in the sky. We can point at China and say, look, the Chinese did it.
Yeah.
Anybody can do it.
And the prerequisite to all of this is peace and stability in the region, which we hope is going to happen right now.
Yeah, there are big problems. We still have big problems. We have the whole Palestinian situation. And Trump has not been a contributing factor to stability there. We don't know what kind of Israeli government will come out of the current crisis in Israel. That's a big problem. We have the Iran sanctions and the abolition of the nuclear deal by the Trump administration. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
We don't know where that would lead. The Russians have proposed a new security system for the Gulf region, which is very good, but the United States and Russia should guarantee it. They should work together, which is nice, because now we have the United States, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain on one side, and Iran on Russia. The other side. Yeah. But if you bring both sides of the Gulf region, bring in Iraq, bring in Yemen, then you can have a much stable situation. You don't have this fractionalization. So there are tension points that can suddenly explode. The military industrial complex and the British intelligence, they have all kinds of tricks they can play. We saw the container, the oil container
from Iran,
things. But thank God this was diffused, because people said, look, this is a game.
Mm-hmm.
Both the Iranians, the Russians, and the United States said, oh, somebody's playing a game here. Let's not fall into it. So that didn't go anyway. It's this kind of provocations that the empire forces are capable of doing. But I think everybody understands now that this is not going to work.
That's an important point. I think people are seeing through a lot of the games, whether it be the Assad gassing his own people hoax, this Iran, this tanker hoax, this even in Venezuela when they were getting the aid caravan and saying that Maduro was preventing his people from getting the aid. All these things are provocations for intervention, and I think people are now extremely skeptical about this. So that's
Yeah.
Now, in sum, how would you want listeners and viewers to interpret what's going on in Syria and the world? So in finishing off the interview, what do you want to stick in their minds?
Well, I think they have to understand and be optimistic that change is possible on a global scale, that we can finally get rid of geopolitical wars, regime change, and poverty, famine, all these problems that come along with it. Because as I said earlier in another interview, it's like we have some adults in the room.
Yeah.
Not unlike 2011 or 2003, we have adults in the room who are saying, look, this thing cannot continue. We have a better alternative. And these adults are like President Putin, Xi Jinping, and they are affecting others to behave in a similar way. And Trump, hopefully, he will behave like an adult and join these forces and don't care about people who talk about collusion with Russia and so on. He says working with Russia is good. He always says that.
That's right.
He says working with China is good. So if the big powers, and this is what Lyndon LaRouche called the four powers, if Russia, China, India, and the United States work together, then all the other countries will follow.
That's right.
But what is the intention? Why should they work together? That's what we should discuss, because we need economic, scientific, cultural development on the whole planet. And we have other planets to explore. There's an intention to do that. There are already plans to do that. And so we can have the human civilization finally become adults.
Right.
We are, as I said earlier, we are not really adults yet, but we can become adults if we think in that way. And remember, we are living in the best of all possible worlds because it's susceptible to change and our will.
That's right. So what would you recommend to a young person who might be listening to this podcast and they want to get involved in building peace in Southwest Asia?
Well, we have many ways of doing that. I mean, of course, they should join our movement.
Yeah.
The LaRouche movement. We exist internationally, especially in the United States and Europe, other parts of the world. They should get a better knowledge. You cannot get knowledge from mass media.
Yeah.
I mean, we have spent like 20 years studying history, going back to our original resources. The reason we can understand Plato is because we study Plato's original words, not some professor's interpretation of Plato. Even Ibn Rushd, the great Muslim philosopher, he was completely wrong about Plato. I read his commentary on the Republic. It's complete disaster. You cannot even trust Ibn Rushd telling you what Plato intends in his work. You should study Plato himself. Yeah. You have to dedicate time and energy to understand these things. But we do have the tools available where you can search for that. It's not a big mystery. Right. It requires a lot of hard work and insight. You can develop that, and that's possible. And I'm grateful that there are people like you, Dr. Kirk, who are helping. I mean, this is very important for the young people. It's not like some old guys listening to an interesting analysis or whatever. I know your intention is to educate people, especially young people, to learn how to act in the world with knowledge and creativity. And I think we have a great opportunity now to break out of that.
And that would be larouchepack.com and schillerinstitute.org, is it?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And so do you have any plans over the next year or so? What are the plans moving forward?
Yeah, well, as I said, I have this LaRouche School for Physical Economics. Right. I'm going to start this. It takes a lot of work. Hopefully we'll have a lot of followers and subscribers and universities who want to work with us to give courses to their students. But we also have other ideas for developing, we are intending to intervene forcefully in the situation in Syria and Yemen and the whole Southwest Asia region with the Belt and Road idea.
Right.
And therefore we're going to be active, maybe travel to that region, meet with officials from these governments, travel to China, mobilize people there to understand how they could intervene in that region with their economic plans. So there will be a lot of work going on, like practical work.
Yeah.
Not only studying, but of course we have to study, we have to learn the whole time. There are many projects that are pushed on the side because of the urgency of the situation, but it would be great if I could dedicate some time to these projects. I have a lot of ideas about, history, the history of the Silk Road, the history of interaction between Islam, Christianity, and China. There are many, many big holes in the knowledge.
Yeah.
And these crises and wars have made it very blurry.
Yes.
The image of Islam is completely destroyed in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say Islam or Muslims, everybody thinks about terrorism, wars, and terrible things instead of thinking about science, architecture, philosophy, and all these things. So we need both in the Muslim world to understand that our history, but also how to understand others' history, and vice versa. I think this is the principle of the Schiller Institute, is that Helga Tseplaru says to get anywhere, you have to understand what is the most beautiful and best in the other culture. If you don't have that, you will never understand your counterpart.
Exactly. Well, I want to thank you not only for this interview, but really for all your work and your determination, your intelligence, your vision. What you're doing is extremely important, not only for Southwest Asia, but for the world. I wish you and the Schiller Institute and your own company all the best and every success in your projects and your struggles ahead. Thank you for leading the way.
Thank you very much, Kurt.
Well, that's all for Independent Thought and Freedom this week. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, make sure you subscribe, leave me a rating, like and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks, and bye for now.